Back with, I want to say this is part 3 of Wendigoon's conspiracy theory Iceberg. And today I don't know how long I'm gonna go since this is my off day, so I don't know, maybe I don't know. We'll see how I'm feeling. If I start feeling a little fatigued from watching a long time, I'll stop. But I'll probably just go for as long as I feel like it. Because after a while you're just like, oh my god, there's so much information. But yeah, let's get right back into it with Arnold's real height, which I think we already heard. It's like 5'10" or something like that. 5'10" to 6'2", something around those lines.
Tier 3, since it's the only one that doesn't fit. But yeah, great way to start off part 2. Natural park closures is in
Okay,
reference
this is
to
where we
the
were.
fact that several national parks around the U.S. will periodically close for unknown reasons. This can range anything from cleanup time to certain year time events when supposedly workers are off, yet it doesn't make sense since national parks aren't exactly something that needs mediated, leaving people to believe supernatural occurrences or things like I spoke of in my stairs video and so on and so forth, that there are these secretive phenomena that occur throughout U.S. national parks that the managers of them want to keep the public quiet of.
Okay, the only thing I could think of is like some of them I could see maybe closing down when it's real bad weather, snow, like rain, thunderstorms. I could see them closing when that stuff's happening because, it's danger to the people to go out there. But any other time, I don't really know why, unless it's like a national holiday. But yeah, I don't know about that one.
Lake Baikal is referencing Lake
Call.
Baikal in Russia and is the deepest lake in the world. At
Oh,
5,387 feet, it's host to several mysteries, including that of aliens and sea
dang.
monsters and things such as. When the
Why is it
lake
so
was
deep?
first
Is it a
discovered,
sinkhole?
several runes and etchings were found that depicted giant fish people walking in and out of the water and these giant serpents moving beneath the waves. It goes further than that though. Declassified Russian documents show that researchers who went underwater to look for missing people came across these humanoid looking creatures in silver suits, and whenever they approached these creatures, 3 people in the crew were instantly killed and 4 others injured. Several lights have been seen both beneath the waves and above them and in the sky around, and people even report mirages of castles and old buildings on the shore that disappear with the blink of an eye. The dancing plague was
Wow,
a
that's weird.
real-world phenomenon that occurred in 1518 in France. For whatever reason, a few people in the middle of the town began dancing. A few more that began watching began dancing as well, and this went on and on for 2 months. During this time, about 400 people became involved, with roughly 24 dying of exhaustion. The story goes that the people who were dancing were crying, trying to get people to help them stop. Local shopkeepers were bringing food out to feed the people as they were dancing since they couldn't quit. And to this day, it's just chalked up as mass hysteria. No one knows why
Yeah,
the
that
dancing
one's
plague
weird.
happened or where it came from, and it just remains a weird story. Panspermia
Hmm.
is a belief that
Oh yeah, I think I've heard of this. It's where like life wasn't created, it was brought here from like an asteroid or something like that.
life does exist in the universe through microorganisms. In other words, asteroids that pass by Earth or other
Yeah.
places that maybe host microorganisms carry them through the stars, and that's where other life species can come from and things such as. It's pretty much just the idea that life exists everywhere around us even if we don't see it. The WebDriver Torso is a bizarre YouTube channel that popped up in 2013. Since then, all the way into 2018, they upload these random videos that are just a red square and a blue block in different directions as beeping noises is played in the background. There are a total of 624,774 of these videos. And while Google has come out and said
Bro.
that it's merely just something to test the YouTube algorithm, the beeping
Oh.
is definitely odd, meaning leading many people to believe it's a sort of numbers broadcast or something else creepy shadow man. Toxoplasmosis is a real-world disease in which the parasite Toxoplasmodia enters the human body. While in the body
Can't you get this from like cat poop? I think.
of a healthy person, Toxoplasmodia does nothing. If someone is pregnant, it can cause severe damage to the baby. Other than that, it's not really a big deal, and the parasite is most often transferred through cats.
Yeah.
However, where the theory comes from is that studies have appeared showing that toxoplasmosis can cause neuroticism in the host. Now, while you may not think this is a big deal to people associated with parasites, keep in mind there are about 3 million confirmed cases of toxoplasmosis in the US every year. The theory
Dang.
with this being that the parasite has drastically influenced not only American culture, but world culture for years due to influence of the psychology of its host, which again is a lot. Introspection rundown is a practice employed by Scientology in order to treat mental breakdowns. This has gone so much so to the point of saying that it is a replacement for psychology itself. While the church is very hush-hush about what happens during these procedures, it did come under scrutiny whenever someone died during one of them. Lisa McPherson was a woman who was a member of the Church of Scientology, and after suffering a mental breakdown in a car accident, members of the church came, took her from a hospital saying that she didn't believe in medical treatment, and brought her to a discreet location. Her body was found weeks later severely dehydrated and malnourished. Not only that, but she had hundreds of insect bites on her, which the coroner later believed to be that of a cockroach.
What were they
So
doing?
that creates many questions about this scenario. Did the cockroach bites happen before or after she died? And if they happened before she died, then what the heck is this introspection process that Scientology uses?
I'd probably
The
say
United
after.
States are an experiment relates to the idea of the Great Experiment, or
I mean, we
the
kinda are.
overarching idea that the United States was created in order to prove to the world if democracy could work. Where it gets into more of the conspiracy side is what powers wanted this experiment to happen, i.e. the Freemasons or the Illuminati, or some other creepy historical shadow organization. Belfield psyops, I couldn't find anything on. I believe this is referring to the Belfield conspiracy, which is sort of an old joke. Belfield is a small town in Germany, and the joke goes like this. Have you ever been to Byfield? Do you know anyone from Byfield? Do you know anyone who's ever been to Byfield? Well, then Byfield simply doesn't exist. It's sort of a parody of the whole idea of crazy conspiracies that just say these blatantly giant things don't exist. Like, for example, in searching for this, I came across the theory that Finland doesn't exist, and that kind of got the point across. Online video game monitoring is exactly what it says, that the government and other agencies is watching online multiplayer games in
I
order
wouldn't doubt
to
it.
monitor what people are saying and doing, which, considering the announcement Sony just made, is not far from the truth. John Babacombe Lee was a man arrested for murder in 1885 and sentenced to hang. In researching this, it seems like he didn't do it, or if he did do it, the evidence was circumstantial at best, since all the evidence I could find was that he was a guy who lived near the woman who was murdered and had a cut on his arm, which meant she may have possibly fought back, which circumstantial at best. However, what's interesting about him is that when he was taken to execution, he was attempted to be hanged 3 times, all 3 times of which it didn't work. What happened is the trapdoor was tested out as he stood there. He then went and stood on it, to which the trapdoor was pulled but wouldn't open. He stepped off, the trapdoor was tested again, to which it opened fine, and this process repeated 3 times, which after finally the medical expert said that he wasn't going to be a part of it because God didn't want this man to hang.
I mean, it seemed like it.
John was just given life in prison. It's an interesting story, especially
got
since
out
there
of
were
death.
witnesses and this happened 3 times in a row. It leads to the idea that perhaps divine intervention didn't want John to die. RPG Insanity Training was a wild read. When I finally found information on it, it's the idea that Yakuza is paying off Nintendo and other game companies such as in order to promote insane behavior in their audience to promote further anarchy and disruption within communities and the world. So, yeah. Don't play Animal Crossing. The Oz factor is the idea that much like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, during certain points people can leave this plane of existence. For example, if you disassociate too hard, you can cross over to another nearby parallel universe, or at least a universe between universes. All the examples that I found in this were such as whenever you enter a building where it seems like none of the workers are there who should be there, or if you're ever walking down the street and interactions seem incredibly odd for a small amount of time, this could be signs that you are in a sort of space between spaces. Now I'll be honest here. Some of these titles are so vague, I could find nothing for them exactly. Like, there's so much stuff it could possibly mean that I'm simply going to have to take a guess, and if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm sorry about that, but I have no idea. So extreme continents, from everything I can figure out, either has to do with lost continents or the end points of known continents. These two actually kind of go hand in hand with each other. I found several theories that during tectonic plate shifts, lost continents, which are land masses that sunk below the ocean, I spoke of Lemuria in tier 2, I believe, that whenever they meet the land and the land begins to slope off, the sort of area between continents is where civilizations used to exist. And that's the best I could do for this. Sorry if that is totally off the mark, but I promise I tried. Shaver's writings refers to the comics written by a man named Richard Shaver. His theory was that thousands of years ago, aliens came to Earth and, after leaving offspring to populate the planet, flew back out to their home planet and left their children, or as he called them, Deros, here on Earth. His explanation fell in line with what I've mentioned before, the hollow Earth theory, or that of Agartha, and that these children live in underground caves, and people who periodically go missing for whatever reason are being used as either food or just a torture source for these underground creatures. Kind of falls in line with the idea that this is not our home and it's someone else's, and at any moment we could essentially be wiped out. So only good thoughts on this channel. Porn control. Can I say porn? Whatever.
Yeah, it's probably good.
Porn control is the idea that porn is used by mass media or global elites in order to make the populace submissive and compliant. The idea with this being people who watch porn have decreased sex drive for other people, which makes them less outgoing and less assertive in situations, and generally makes a weaker populace, and therefore porn is used as a manner to disable the population for whatever these higher powers want. A temporary autonomous zone is more of a belief, especially one imposed by anarchists throughout history, with the idea that throughout periods of time, whenever government is infringing on culture too much, areas should crop up, or temporary autonomous zones as they're called, in which information could be exchanged freely and thoughts and ideas between people, and then they could disseminate and leave the autonomous zone, and these ideas could continue to proliferate. So from everything I read, essentially think of it as underground churches or secret book readings during book burning times throughout history, and things such as basically the whole idea that if a government is encroaching on culture or ideas too much, that people should come together and exchange them in secret. Henotheism is when someone believes in many gods yet only worships one god. This is something that is commonly seen in old world history, where often people would believe in the
like Greeks,
hierarchy of
Romans,
gods in old legends, yet they would normally only go to churches or worship a specific one. This is just sort of the name to describe that. Quantum jumping is an idea in spiritual psychology and very closely relates to spiritual science. It is the idea that in times of stress, someone can quantum jump to another version of themselves in a parallel universe in order to gain insight or information. This has a lot to do with self-enlightenment, and if you wanted to think of it as anything, kind of think of it as the Oz factor I mentioned earlier, only done on purpose in order to learn something. Fulcanelli is interesting because no one knows the identity of this man, and the only reason we know he exists is through his journals and students who say they learned under him. Fulcanelli was a French alchemist. This relates back to the Philosopher's Stone that I mentioned earlier, but he wasn't just an alchemist, he was the best. So much so that his students say they would routinely see him turn 100 grams of iron into gold and things such as. Considering that he would have operated in, I believe, the 1500s, any practices that he would have been doing would be far ahead of his time, yet again, we don't know his identity. This leads theories for everything that he was an alien or the devil, so figure out somewhere in the middle what you want him to be. Fringe Viper releases is exactly what it sounds like. Several deadly viper species popped up in France within the last 20 to 30 years, with the idea being that secret organizations or the French government themselves are purposefully doing it either to keep people out of the woods or control the populations of various species of animal. Although the latter doesn't make that much sense, because if you wanted to do that, why make them venomous? Grey goo is another concept that has to do with singularity that again I mentioned in tier 2, or ideas of technology taking over. It essentially gets to the idea that nanotech will commit something called ecophagy, which translates to literally eating the habitat. The idea being that at some point a nanotech will be developed that only knows to reproduce itself over and over again. And if it sees humanity as a threat to this initiative, it will simply eat everything, and I mean everything. Habitat, landmass, biomass, all of it, and create a gray goo across the planet of itself. It's one of those cataclysmic events in which we could wipe ourselves out, which is talked about several times before and will be mentioned several times
Yeah,
again.
like AI.
Mach's principle is an idea in theoretical physics and makes us ask the question of why some things are held in orbit while other things are pushed away. The description or example that's most common is
Doesn't it have to do with just speed, and that's the reason why. If it's going fast enough.
this. If you were to stand in a field and look directly up at the stars and hold your arms out to your side and spin around, then why do the stars stay in orbit as you spin while your arms are being pulled out from you? And essentially comes back to the idea that while in motion, things near you are pushed away and things away from you are kept in a relative position. It's a weird idea that has to do with, again, theoretical physics, but that's basically the principle of it, and it's used to explain a lot of natural phenomena. Volcani, I have no idea how to pronounce that, is a series of forests that occur in the Latvian area of Europe, in which these giant stones are assembled into these piles, and no one knows why. Theories have originally ranged that maybe
Graves?
a castle was going to be built there and just hadn't, but there's no record of that throughout history. To giants putting the stones there's giants again. What's even weirder is that it seems these stones periodically move. Never enough to be widely noticed or able to be pointed at by everyone, but just enough to keep the local park people suspicious that they're being moved. And keep in mind, these are really big rocks. It's not like some kid could just come throw them into another pile if they wanted. It would take some deliberate force of nature. This has led to people around the area considering it a spiritual site, and it is a very popular destination for yogis and witches and things such as. Deep ecology fascism is the combination of two different ideologies. Deep ecology is the idea that nature should not only be preserved, but that nature itself is alive and should be treated as such. While fascism is, for this purpose, the idea of preserving original ideas and circumstances for future generations. So if you were to combine the two, it would be the idea of preserving nature to such a ridiculous degree as if nature itself was alive, which would essentially treat any crime against nature as a crime against man. Deathworm
Those would
relates
be
to
like
that of
murder.
Mongolian deathworm, in which the desert of Mongolia, the locals.
Oh yeah, I've heard of this. Long time ago, I watched some show. I don't remember what it was called, but I remember seeing these. It was some like scary show on the TV when I was young, and I remember this being one of the videos. It was like a lost tape footage stuff. I think it was called Lost Tapes. Yeah, and I remember seeing this on it, on one of them.
Of a giant serpent or worm that lives beneath the sand, and that people who are caught out there by themselves are swallowed up by it. This is backed up by reports in the area of people going missing with no body being found in the desert, and these odd trails being left in the sand for seemingly no reason. I don't even know if I can talk about this one either. It's exactly what it looks like, the joke off of Family Guy, and says that the government developed one in the 80s, and I'm not kidding. KKK funded by governments is exactly what it sounds like.
Alright, I doubt this one.
The government has funded the Ku Klux Klan in order to keep down minorities throughout history, and not just our government, but that England had backing in it too. So yeah. The Titanic didn't sink actually has more plausible information behind it than any other conspiracy in this tier. The company that owned the Titanic, White Star Line, which keep in mind one of the partial owners was JP Morgan, had another ship in their fleet called the Olympia. Most people have it in their mind that the Titanic was way larger than any other ship at its time, but that's not necessarily true. For example, the Olympia, which was another ship owned by the same company, was very similar in size and appearance. A few months before the Titanic set sail, the Olympia had an accident that damaged it seriously and supposedly was going to cost a lot of money to repair. The story is that the Olympia was replaced for the Titanic and simply names were changed between the two ships, and the Olympia was actually sunk as a whole insurance fraud move in order
Oh.
for these stockholders to get a return on their investment. There's a lot of sort of evidence that goes into this. For example, pictures of the Titanic as it's leaving seem to resemble the Olympia more than the Titanic itself. There are records of crewmen who were supposed to be hush-hush about it, calling the Olympia the Titanic in private. And even more so, the Californian, which was another ship in the vessel, the night the Titanic sunk, went to about the same spot, hung out for a few hours, and then left, implying that they were setting up something. It's very odd, and there's a whole lot of information about this, so I encourage you to check it out yourself.
Weird.
Smithsonian suppression refers to the recently discovered event in which, around 1900, the Smithsonian smashed thousands of giant human skulls in order to maintain the theory of evolution the way science saw it at the time. This doesn't just stop at skulls, though. They destroyed other bones such as femurs that were 4 feet long because it didn't match the current theories of the time. I guess that's the way science worked back then. If it didn't support your theory, just destroy it. These skulls were found across North America, and not only would it have answered questions about immigration to North America before, the coming of Europe and whatnot, it would also have been an opportunity to study these giant humanoid creatures. But we can't, because someone in the 1900s from the Smithsonian didn't like that it didn't match their science project. So, yeah, do with that information what you will. Tier 4's title is A Depth of Secrets, and it reads, occult learnings and mysteries of lower tier that apparently seem to be innocent start to become more sinister. You begin to see...
So, at this point for tier 3, I've gotten... I don't think I knew much of any of those. I knew some, but this one seems like I'm not going to know much of anything.
See patterns everywhere, realizing you only dip your toes in the conspiracy world. Very few people believe or have heard of stuff from this level. First up, we have the Dzopa tribe and the related Dropa stones. This one was really interesting. In 1938, a Chinese research team went to the Himalayan mountains in search of some ore deposit that had been picked up by geographers. Once the team got there, however, they found 716 graves hidden in the back of these tunnel systems that ran through the Himalayan mountains. What's even weirder was inside of each of these graves was a 4-foot tall human skeleton with an abnormally large sized skull. The tombs were filled with ciphers and hieroglyphics that didn't make sense, but located on each one of the grave was a circular disc that have since been termed the Dropa stones. Each of these discs are estimated to be 12,000 years old and contain minerals such as cobalt, which is very rare and normally only found on meteorites, at least, in the Himalayan mountains. Years later, research from a Russian university determined that the hieroglyphics on the Dropa stones read out prime numbers. Since this experience, the Chinese government has censored all information regarding it and made that section of the Himalayas a no-travel zone. So yeah, starting off with a good one. Lord Packel's time machine relates to the Mayan king Lord Packel. When researchers found his coffin, they noticed the odd inscriptions on the lid of the coffin that showed him laying inside of what seemed to be some sort of machinery interacting with this very diverse device for whatever reason. What's especially odd is the related Mayan transcriptions in the area spoke that Lord Packel had the ability to control the turning of the sun and things such as. What's even weirder is upon further inspection of the body in the coffin, it is estimated to be that of a 30 to 40-year-old man. Lord Packel was king of this Mayan area for 80 years. So either someone else is buried in Lord Packel's grave, or that inscription of him controlling a machine and turning back the moon and the stars may have some worth to it. Monsanto is essentially your stereotypical evil conglomerate company. They have been known to sue farmers for using natural pesticides in growing supplements. They have been known to fund government campaigns in which the elected politician plans to cut back on restrictions regarding the environment, and have even gone as far to cover up cancer research on their specific products.
Wait, is this real?
Cause cancer. Of course, as you could imagine, Monsanto is at the center of a lot of conspiracies regarding big pharma and evil tech and things such as. Vimanas are interesting, and one of the weirdest parts, I think, whenever you look into this whole ancient alien idea. In old Hindu and Sanskrit text, there are these records of these giant flying palaces, and they're not mentioned in any supernatural or strange sense. They're simply depictions and writings of these giant floating palaces that would exist above the Himalayan mountains. It's so odd to me whenever you look at stuff like this, how old world countries would simply just be like, oh yeah, flying houses, those are a thing. North Korea utopia is exactly what it says. It's the idea that North Korea is actually a secretive, perfect world, but that Western media and European media simply discredit it as order to discredit communism and lift up capitalism. That's at least the main version. The other version is a bit
Yeah, I
more
don't believe this one.
interesting, I think. It's the idea that beneath North Korea is a perfect utopia, but in order to seem unassuming to the world around them, periodically different citizens are sent to live on the surface for years at a time in order to maintain a low-key look, while they live in perfection and disease-free beneath. However, the first
Yeah, I
version
doubt this one.
is usually the most popular, as it's simply saying that our governments are censoring information as to not give us an idea that other systems of government could work better. L'Enfant, also known as Pierre L'Enfant, was the chief architect who designed the streets for Washington, D.C. In his notes, he said he used the celestial bodies in order to map out the routes for D.C. That's why D.C. has very odd street planning when it comes to diagonal cuts and things such as. But as other people have pointed out, these streets also line up in satanic shapes, such as several pentagrams or old world geographic shapes being formed by DC streets. This all relates back to the idea that he was funded by the Freemasons and that the original leaders of the United States knew what he was up to, and it's all Illuminati, Satan, government, yeah. The grand unified conspiracy theory is rather diverse depending on who you ask. Normally it looks something like this, and it's just the idea that reptilians and big pharma and Illuminati and Satanism and all that interconnect with each other, and it is all one conspiracy theory that we just look at certain aspects of. Cyber squatting time travelers is pretty funny. For those that don't know, cyber squatting is the practice of buying URLs or usernames on websites that you know are the names of famous people or companies in the hopes that they will one day buy that domain off of you. So the time traveler aspect is hilarious. The only evidence I could find with any of this was supposedly odd names that wouldn't have made a lot of sense, but I mean, you could just chalk that up to people hoping to get lucky. Comic-Con child recruitment's pretty sad. Just the fact that there are children every year during Comic-Con who go missing. The idea of which being they're abducted by human trafficking rings. However, the conspiracy goes a level deeper and says that Comic-Con knows of this behavior, but they are paid off in order to turn a blind eye or to not better tighten security to prevent this type of thing. Plastic surgery runaways was just vague enough that it was hard to find any information on. I believe this is referring to the fact that there are plastic surgeons who will famously perform surgery on either runaways or people who have been kidnapped. This wraps back into human trafficking, but it adds an extra layer to it by implying that medical professionals, or at least some, are in on the whole scheme. Lifetide is a book written by Lyle Watson. A lot of the complex in it are pretty intense. From what little brief reading I did on it, it seems to be the idea that humans are artificial or can at least summon an artificial self through their thoughts, and it all has to do with introspection and the idea of looking inwards to bring out the better self. So a lot of sort of Eastern philosophy, yogi type ideas. Baltic Sea anomaly refers to an event that happened in 2011 in which a fishing ship that was using sonar caught this image while looking at the bottom of the Baltic.
Bro, that's so weird looking. There's no way that's natural. That does not look natural.
Sea. The Baltic Sea is, as you could imagine, pretty deep, and the idea behind this being that it is a UFO that crashed on the planet some time ago. It's still there to this day. However, for anyone who knows anything about sea travel, it is much, much harder to keep someone alive underwater than it is in space. This is due to things like pressure, and the deeper you go into water, the harder it is to maintain, which is the reason we normally just send submersibles really deep, and it costs a lot of money. So no one's seen it fit to investigate this yet, or that's what they want you to think. But either way, as far as this moment goes, all we know about is there's this odd shape down there. Planned extinction is just referring to the fact of an idea that was mentioned in previous tiers, that humanity will eventually become extinct, and how this might even be a good thing in order to save the planet. That's the entire idea of eco-triage, that we have to cut off the bleeding somewhere, the bleeding being...
I mean, in all reality, it would be better for the world if we weren't here. But, you know. I digress.
us in order to save our ecosystem. Haunted locations world map. From everything I can find, there are several maps that display different haunted locations in the world. So perhaps looking into each of them and researching. If that's what this does means, this could literally go on forever. But I think it's just referring to the fact that there are documented records of haunted places around the world, and that should be at least a little bit concerning. Artificial poisonous snow is something that occurs in mostly Midwest cities from everything I could find, in which snow will occasionally fall from the sky and not melt for a very extended amount of time, and whenever flames is held to it, it becomes black. The implication in this being that the government or some other force is raining this artificial snow on us to poison us in some way.
Sounds like some
However,
weird
in the
pollution.
extra research I did on this, I think this is just pollution. King Babylon's world
yeah.
control is kind of vague because there is no King Babylon. Babylon was an empire. There were kings like Nebuchadnezzar II and Hammurabi, and each have their own conspiracy theories. If I had to guess, this is specifically referring to in the book of Revelations, where it talks about Babylon will be the downfall of the new world empires and things such as, which I think this is basically referring to the idea that there will be strength rise up from the east, so to speak. However, that's all speculation. What I believe the conspiracy is referring to is just this idea in Revelations, and the idea that at some point there will be a leader rise up in the Middle East who will dominate control of at least several world powers. Depopulation funds is very closely related to the planned extinction I talked about earlier. When it comes to this, everything I could find mostly related back to Bill Gates and ideas that money is being put into several ecological departments that are studying things such as, and everything else I could find on it related back to the idea that they are planning to get rid of what they refer to as useless eaters, which is actually a term originally coined in Nazi Germany and just refers to people who take up space in a population without contributing. So if it ever got to a point where we were losing our ecosystem fast and we had to immediately correct the human population, the first to go would be these useless eaters, or whoever the government rules is not fit to continue, basically.
Sad.
SCPs
I'll be right back. I'm gonna get me a drink. Alright, I'm back.
based on real life is just saying one of two options,
cool.
that either the SCP Foundation is real and that all the logs have been linked by disgruntled SCP agents, or some real life supernatural phenomena is hidden in SCP files, both to keep the identity of the person who uploaded it safe and to warn whatever few people may read it of what's really out there.
I don't know a lot about SCPs. I know that I'm pretty sure it's a group effort to write a bunch of stories or something along those lines. And I could see some stuff could be based on real life. Like, you could have inspiration from real life to create stories about SCPs, I would think.
There. I personally like the second one more since it's at least sort of plausible. So yeah, holotropic breath work is a practice that is found in a lot of yogi circles, especially Chinese and other Eastern philosophies. It's the idea that quick, fast breaths for time periods up to even 3 hours can cause the body to sort of reset itself and be more in touch with the inner self. And from this, you can derive true knowledge, spiritualism, and whatever have you for the situation. Hermeneutics is about critiquing things from a sense of inner self. Basically, everything I could find on it is just the idea that if there's a literary text or some other form of media that you're trying to understand, that you have to embellish from the self in order to truly understand it, and that people talking doesn't really accomplish anything without meditation. Almost every application I could find of this related to the Bible, and there are several people who have their own interpretations of the Bible using hermeneutics. The sea people were interesting. When I saw the title, I thought this would just be referring to Atlantis fish people or whatever, but it's not at all. From 1200 to 900 BC, there was a group of people who are only known in history as the Sea People, who went around the Mediterranean Sea fighting different nations, famously of which was Egypt around 1000 BC.
They were just straight up pirates running around fighting people.
These people were supposed to be taller than the average person, no specific mention of giants, just that they were rather large, and they were great fighters and plunderers, and from everything I read, the earliest possible version of pirates. What's interesting is no one knows where they came from. about every other player around the Mediterranean was noted for at that time, and to this day no one knows where the sea people came from or where they went, and they just forever remain this kind of blip in history. Cryptogeography is exactly what it
Atlantis?
sounds like how cryptozoology is the study of paranormal animals, cryptogeography is the study of paranormal spaces. So Bermuda Triangle, haunted sites, yada yada. Infrared laundry balls is the fact that laundry detergent balls that supposedly even in advertising for them mention that they clean clothes with an infrasonic wave actually elicit enough of the stuff to harm the individual. However, whenever companies say stuff like that, they're just using big words to try to talk over people's head and make them think they know what they're doing, because no, they don't. Neg entropy, or negative entropy, is a concept that exists in thermal physics.
I've heard this, but I don't know what it
sources
is.
of energy derive from heat in some regard. They either bring heat in or let it out. And any action of energy dispels heat in some way. This makes sense if you think about it more. However, a theoretical negative entropy item would bring in heat or ambient energy in the air whenever it performs a task or does any function. This would theoretically cause a sort of paradoxical loop in which something can be done without taking in energy, and as a matter of fact, creating more of it while also doing more. So this could spiral on forever and ever, and
Infinite
if you read
energy?
theories on this in the universe. So that's cool. I'll be honest, I could not find anything on Nexus 7. There was one website called Nexus 7 that had a few creepy
Sounds like a
articles on
game.
it, but that was the name of the website and not a conspiracy in general. Nexus 7 is both the name of the Android laptop or pad or tablet, whatever it is, and another theory for the movie Blade Runner that one of the characters was a Nexus 7 model. So anything I look up for theory or analysis goes to one of the two, and I have absolutely no idea what this could be referring to unless the tablet or the character from Blade Runner has a conspiracy behind it. It's come to my attention at this point that when this is all over, I'll need to do a corrections video because there's a few other minor details I messed up on. So if anyone can tell me in the comments what this Nexus 7 thing means, I will absolutely give you credit for it, and I can quit trying to look up pictures of tablets. So yeah, sorry about that, but I promise I tried. The Black Hope Curse is an interesting one. In Houston, Texas, there was a family that moved into a small suburb and immediately began noticing odd things happening around their house. Until one day, an old man showed up and told them that they had bodies in their backyard. The family didn't believe him, but after digging up
Bro,
the
that's a
backyard,
serial
they
killer.
discovered that there was, in fact, 2 dead bodies buried side by side. It turns out the neighborhood was built on top of an old slave cemetery, the name of which was Black Hope Cemetery. The family reburied the bodies and set up a memorial for them. However, things kept getting worse around the house. At first it was subtle, such as a missing pair of shoes here or a slight noise down the hallway there, until eventually it became more malicious. Things that were being lost in the house were found on top of the graves in the backyard. After doing research, the mother figured out that these two were a buried slave couple, and she felt that by disturbing their grave, she had made them angry. This led to an eventual legal battle with the neighborhood because they sold them a house and didn't tell them there was bodies under it, to which the judge said he would need definitive proof that there were bodies under the house. The mother, in a rage, went back home and began digging up around her yard. Her daughter, who was helping her, came across another body, said she felt ill, and immediately had a seizure, and then died 2 days later in a hospital. The family moved out of the house, the bodies were covered up, and to this day it said that the Black Hope Curse still resides in Houston, Texas. Falun Gong is an
Probably released like some kind of virus and made her have a seizure. Jesus.
interesting one,
Don't dig up dead bodies.
as it seems to be a religion that's derived from Chinese philosophy that also went at odds with the Chinese government. Although initial reports are mixed of why this rivalry started, we know it got to the point that there was about 70 million Falun Gong members who all stood at odds with the Chinese government. This became a total smear campaign,
I mean, someone has to, because obviously nothing's happening right now.
which the government was blocking the word Falun Gong online, throwing various members in prison. It's even estimated that about 2,000 Falun Gong members were killed while in prison. What's even more interesting is that this religion and the founders of it went on to found the Epoch Times, which is now a pretty well-known news source that constantly talks bad about the Chinese government, and seeing where they came from, you could kind of guess why. Geometrodynamics is sort of the theoretical geometry to theoretical physics, and the idea that natural phenomenon and the universe itself can be described and quantitated through geometry. So super next level math stuff. Tor, owned by the government, is in reference to the internet browser Tor, also known as the Onion, which lets people access the dark web. What's funny is this conspiracy Iceberg was written in 2017, and it has since been proven without a shadow of a doubt that Tor is absolutely run by the government. Not only was it only created to perform government ops and things such as on unlisted websites, but it is also known that they monitor certain transactions on it in order to figure out where people are and what they're doing, and certain upkeep cost for the Tor browser is funded by certain state departments, if secretly so. So yeah, look at this all going up. Something that was on the conspiracy Iceberg now making its way into headlines. Isn't that cute? Cave Dweller Holocaust, while I couldn't find a very specific instance, is in reference to the idea that there were at one point at least two different kinds of humanoid creatures, one of which being us, the other being troglodytes, or cave dwelling creatures. The idea being that at some point we hunted and killed these troglodytes either out of self-defense or just to stay at the top of the food chain. This relates to several old world mythologies and stories relating to a troglodyte or cave dweller type creature, but obviously none existing in our present sense. The Trilateral Commission is a board that was founded in 1973 by John Rockefeller, and yes, that's the Rockefeller name. They meet twice a year in Tokyo, Japan, and the board is made up of United States, Western European, Japanese, and Canadian members who discuss kind of like the Bilderberg meetings,
trilateral
and other adult things. I don't know what.
Didn't he just name like 4 countries and then call it tri?
They say they do. It's absolutely rife with conspiracies. Like reading about these people, they get blamed from everything from 9/11 to John F. Kennedy, even though they didn't exist yet. So yeah, super creepy top 1% elitist. Meet every year and talk about stuff. Also, I should mention, especially with that one, I'm at the point in researching this stuff that whenever I type some of this in, the first results are what are you talking about? You don't want to look up that. Look at this picture of Trump and Epstein. Or like the first 10 search results will just be headline after headline that's like, the dumbest conspiracy of the year, ? See why people don't trust the elite. So yeah, I can only imagine what the other 6 tiers are going to be like.
Yeah, I was about to say, he's just now like, what? He's 4 in. He's not even halfway yet. And he's now having trouble finding the certain information. This is going to be hard for him, I imagine, once he gets later on.
Is exactly what it says. The idea that dolphins are much more intelligent than they're given credit for.
Yeah.
But in the more conspiracy side of stuff, it is more so than even the government's letting on. Ideas being that tests with dolphins have shown that they have very complex thought processes, even understanding right and wrong.
They're smart.
However, in order to not discredit our role as top of the food chain, so to speak, all media regarding them simply is like, oh, aren't they a smart animal? When in reality, we're locking up and caging things with complex emotions and conscious. So, you know, again, only good thoughts on this channel. Meat showers refers to the Kentucky meat shower that occurred in 1876. As witnessed by many people on a farm in Kentucky, specifically Bath County, Kentucky, for several minutes, chunks of meat anywhere from 2 to 4 inches wide rained from the sky. And this isn't just like a few pieces after the other. This is like a shower of the stuff, to the point that the entire ground was covered with it in a 100-foot radius. This was 1876, so research was weird. There are some people who said that it was essentially a giant cyanobacteria, to others who said it was human flesh, and then researchers who pulled meat from the area got everything back that it was human, to deer, to bear, to whatever. Also, I should mention the amount of people who ate this meat off the ground and said it was either chicken or horse was alarming. Himalayan zombie refers to the ideas of zombies that exist in Himalayan cultures that more so follow the entire voodoo idea of zombies as a resurrected servant of the dead. A lot of the mythology around them is really cool, such as the fact they're not allowed to bend over as they are sort of this hardened corpse, so several houses in the Himalayas will have the door built lower just so these creatures can't get in. They're also specifically referred
That's
to
pretty
as
cool.
Rolang, and there are 5 different kinds of Rolang that each have their own weaknesses, ranging from you have to break one of its bones to you have to hit it on a specific spot on its body, and so on and so forth. Where a lot of the creepiness of this comes from is that Himalayan tour guides will be walking with people up the mountain, and travelers who have been with these tour guides will point to someone standing way off in the distance, to which the tour guide will simply say, "That's a Rolang. Don't look at it and just keep walking." So the idea that there is these mystic zombies existing on the Himalayan mountains to either do the will of their master or simply keep foreigners out is both very scary and very cool. Deep Philosophies is just this very specific idea and the principle that whenever judging something, be it someone, some idea, or some piece of work, that interacting with other people doesn't help, and you have to pull everything out of yourself in order to actually understand how you feel about it, and that's where true understanding comes from. It's very closely related to hermeneutics, which I talked about earlier. Next is Civil War sightings. This is pretty vague, and there are a lot of paranormal events that existed throughout the Civil War, some of which include the Nicolas Cage vampire, I'm not kidding on that one, a pterodactyl that was shot down, and the green-eyed thing. But what I think this is referring to is the ghost sightings that have taken place after the war. Well, there are several of these. I will stick to a few of the most notable ones that occurred at Gettysburg. For one, at Little Round Top, during a filming of the movies Gettysburg, extras that were in Union uniforms were sitting in the woods, to which then an old Union soldier who smelled of gunpowder and looked very rustic and dirty came up to the men, began talking about how much this fight meant to him, handing out ammunition, and then ran away. When the men got back to the shooting site, that man wasn't there, and no one had any record of an extra being there. After presenting the munitions to the prop department, they said this isn't theirs, and this is real munitions from the Civil War. Sachs Bridge is another one in which a group of teenagers who were walking over the bridge began hearing horses running and cannon fire go off, to which they got scared, ran away, but then decided they should go back. When they went back, they saw the apparitions of people on horseback jumping over the river and riding up the hill. There are several reports that while at Gettysburg, people have heard cannon fire and the sounds of battle raging on, the idea being that these people are stuck in a perpetual loop. My favorite, however, out of all these is that of the ghostly surgery room. There was a building on the Gettysburg battlefield that at the time was being used as a field hospital. That building is now a library. A few years ago, 2 men were taking the elevator down to the basement. When the basement doors opened, it was not the basement that they knew, and instead it was a very old Civil War era appearing room that was full with patients and doctors running around, and it was the full scene to them of this entire hospital in motion. Both of the men freaked out, and one of them rapidly pressed on the button to go back up, and just as the doors were closed, he made eye contact with a nurse who saw him for a brief second. This last one's especially cool.
Oh, that's
because it gets into one
creepy.
of my favorite theories about ghosts, that of being, since time is an illusion, there are moments in which time doesn't react correctly, and 2 people standing in the same place interact with each other without knowing it. So the idea that this nurse all the way back then saw people from the future and they made eye contact for a brief second, it's just a really cool thought process when it comes to a better understanding of the world and time as sort of a construct. MIRL cults, the acronym MIRL refers to meet in real life, as in reference to the fact that several online internet cults actually form into real world cults that perform different ritualistic acts or things like that when they meet in person. Every bit of information I could find pointed towards a specific setting in which around the 2010s in Los Angeles there were several murders that occurred, supposedly by an internet cult that started online, but this is just in reference to that idea. The Toronto Protocol is in reference to French documents that were found in 1985. Supposedly this document was a French translation of a form that was handed out to several different world powers and world elites around the same time. The basis of this document was that in order to pass agendas into society, that they first need to begin by breaking down ideas of family, ideas of tradition, and things such as. One of the main things in the manifesto was destroying religion by indoctrinating communities with the idea that religion is not a good thing and should instead be handed off to governments and things like that to mandate what the people think. Of course, this all relates back to Illuminati, New World Order type stuff, but the reason it's called the Toronto Protocol is because it was originally discovered in Toronto, or by someone in Toronto. The Perestroika deception, at least I think that's how it's pronounced, is in reference to a new USSR idea that came out of the Cold War. Out of the Cold War, Gorbachev developed this idea of Perestroika, which is essentially saying that in order to further progress the communist ideal within Russia, that they need to be more subdued about it and not as gung-ho as they were during the Cold War in trying to push socialist ideas onto others. The idea of the Perestroika deception comes from KGB defector Anatoly Golitsyn, which said that Perestroika was just a subversion in order to get the world looking away from socialist ideas being implanted into other countries, and instead it would be done slowly through political uprising and behind the scenes movements and things like that. Essentially, the idea that communism is still on the rise, just in a much more subtle and careful way than it was in the Cold War. Presentism is a philosophy very commonly seen in the modern world. It is the idea that people need to be anti-critical about things that happen around them, such as the news, real world events, and things such as, and should instead focus on the here and now and simply consume media and things like that rather than thinking about what they're doing. The idea behind it is that New World Order, Illuminati stuff purposefully injects this into the population to make them more submissive to whatever agendas they try to propagate. The Boots Void, or Burt's Void, not sure how to pronounce
I've heard
that.
this.
It is a region in space that is 330 million light
Yeah, it's so creepy that so much of space is like empty. Like, what happened there? Like, it's like a black hole swallowed a bunch of stuff and then disappeared.
years in radius. It is also known as the supervoid, and the reason it's called this, it is a peculiarly large amount of space for so few galaxies. Originally in 1960, it was estimated that only 8 galaxies existed in this entire 330 million wide area. After modern research, it's believed the number is closer to 2,000, but still, that puts it at
Still
less
not
than
very much.
1/10 of the normal galaxy compaction that occurs throughout space. It raises the question as to why such a wide area of space is completely unpopulated. Some even take this theory to the extent and say that it is because of alien races that colonize and destroy galaxies as they come across from them, and we are simply seeing the aftermath of that. Yellow Cuban balloons is in reference to 7 yellow balloons that were found in a box off the coast of Florida in the 1970s. Given the address and the date on the box and the condition of the box itself, it was estimated that these had been floating in the ocean for roughly 8 weeks. The address on this box said that they were from the USSR to Cuba. When opening the box, they discovered 7 identical yellow balloons that were all inflated with what seemed to be normal air lying in the bottom of the box. After doing research on them, there was absolutely nothing weird about the box itself. There was no wrong condition to the gas inside of the box, there was nothing special about the box itself, but for some reason these balloons were just being shipped in a crate to Cuba for seemingly no reason, and why were they floating in the middle of the ocean? It's still one of those old Cold War mysteries that have never been solved and probably never will. Driver killed JFK is specifically in mention to William Greer, and while initial reports that came out immediately after John F. Kennedy's murder believed him to be the shooter as he turns back to Kennedy in the Zapruder film before the shot goes out, the actual version of events makes a bit more sense. The driver, William Greer, as well as the passenger in the front seat were both CIA agents, and going into the idea that the CIA murdered Kennedy, things start to add up. For example, why after the first shot was fired did he slow down instead of hitting the gas, driving, turning around, doing
Oh yeah, he
anything?
should have
But he brought
beamed
the car
it.
down to a 7-mile-an-hour speed. Also,
Bro, as soon
keep
as
in
you
mind,
hear a
after
shot,
the
you
first shot went out, hitting the guy in the
you just
front
hit
seat
it.
seemed to duck in the picture before he turns around. If William Greer himself
Bro,
did
you're-
not murder the president,
Bro, you're CIA, Secret Service kind of people. You should be protecting the president. You gun the gas and you get out of there. That's what you're supposed to do.
the theory says that he was in the know on the circumstances that would lead to his death. So much so
I could
that
see this
Jackie,
one.
after the fact, said several times how odd it was his driving, and she blames John's death on the actions of William Greer in not reacting fast enough, or
Yeah.
not wanting to react fast enough. Fracking deaths refers to the fact that around fracking instances, there seems to be an uncharacteristically large amount of deaths from consequences of fracking. For example, it's estimated through reports that in Appalachia alone, roughly 1,200 to 4,600 people have been killed by side effects of fracking, i.e. air pollution, water pollution, and things such as. Given the places that these deaths occur, it is believed that the government knows that fracking causes these deaths and are either purposefully doing it in areas they want to exterminate, or at least allowing it to happen to quell the local populace. Esoteric Hitlerism is exactly what it says. It is combining ideas of Hitler from World War II with esotericism, and says that the Third Reich was propagating several sort of universal spiritual ideas in their methodology, and that in the more extreme versions of this, Hitler himself is a form of deity. All the research you do with this leads back to Agartha and Central Earth, and the idea that Hitler essentially raised himself to godhood. Red rooms are the name given to several dark web pages in which people are either killed or tortured for the enjoyment of others online. A lot of this, as you read into it, gets into human trafficking, and while we know for a fact red rooms exist, what makes it even scarier is that all of these people had to come from somewhere, more than likely abduction cases that happen around the US and the rest of the world every year. Plant intelligence is in reference to the theory that plants have a higher intelligence than initially thought of by people. What I mean by this is that we understand that plants react to certain stimuli in certain ways, such as trees will grow in the direction of sunlight, or certain mosses will react to being touched, and things such as. It goes into a further level in saying that plants have a version of consciousness that we just don't understand, and the idea that nature is alive in more literal a sense than we normally mean it. Now come to talk to you about Last Thursdayism, because I promised if this topic was ever covered in the Iceberg, I would let them, is my girlfriend and Last Thursdayism expert, Kayla.
Oh.
What is cool? Hello. Last Thursdayism, also known as the Omphalos hypothesis, I don't know how to say that, it's Omphalos, is an idea based around the book of Genesis and creationism that states that when God made the earth, he would have obviously had to make Adam and Eve fully grown with hair, a navel, skin, toenails, and that the grass would have been months old grass at least, and the earth would have been fully formed in a way that made it look 1,000,000 years old. The whole idea of it stems from Philip Henry Goss, who wrote a book with the same name, Omphalos. The natural progression of the idea and where the conspiracy theory comes in is that God or the creator, whatever you believe in, could have done everything as soon as last Thursday, hence Last Thursdayism, which means that we could have been created just as early as last Thursday. Every memory, every thought, everything we ever thought we felt would have been implanted into our brains as early as last Thursday. It's a very interesting theory. It's my favorite one ever, because to me it feels like, yeah, that totally could be possible.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
Thank you, Kayla. Acosmism is more of an abstract idea, and it essentially says that nothing in reality is real except for God. So what that means in a practical sense is that none of your experiences, none of what you know is reality. Instead, there is just a God or hierarchical being that is implanting these ideas into us. So essentially everything's a simulation given to us by a deity. The Bouvet Island lifeboat is in reference to Bouvet Island, which is known to be the most uninhabited or uninhabitable island in the world. It is located north off the coast of Antarctica and is essentially a giant glacial rock that is formed.
This man say north of Antarctica? It's gonna be cold, boy.
It has absolutely no greenery or no sense of sustainability on it. In 1964, one of the first crews to ever go research the island, when they got to the island, found a lifeboat that was not just sitting there, but pulled onto shore. However, around it, they could not find any footprints, any evidence of life, nothing. But something got that lifeboat to shore, then pulled it on. There were never any bodies found, anything else discovered, and it simply remains a mystery of how that boat got there. A lot of the theories that have to do with it reference back to the idea of Agartha, and that German soldiers from World War II who were moving that direction, one of them may have got stranded there and later picked up, and that goes in line with the entire idea that the Nazis found Agartha in Antarctica and then tried to move their troops there once the war was over. Abiogenic oil is the thought that oil, as we know it, is not actually a fossil fuels given from dinosaurs or other prehistoric creatures, and is instead come from an entirely non-biotic process. Essentially, it would work that carbon monoxide and hydrogen rised up to the surface, combined with zirconium, and created a petrohydroxyl. What that essentially means is that through a mix of natural gases, oil was formed instead of the way that we normally think of it as fossil fuels. Secret societies today is vague, but you get the idea. Just the idea that the Freemasons, Illuminati, and stuff
I mean,
like that are
there's definitely secret societies today. There's no like way there isn't.
all these conspiracy networks that still exist and operate today outside of the public eye. Real Mizium is kind of hard to figure out on because I can't find a reference to any Mizium with real in the beginning of it, but Mizium itself is in reference to an event that happened on 4chan a few years back. Essentially, a new user appeared on the site called Mizium that said that they were an alien from a different planet who was simply stopping by, connected to the internet, and wanted to know if people had any questions. After answering questions in a sort of vague manner, people started requesting that they take pictures of their house or of their geographic location. Mizium then went around to these areas and started snapping pictures of people's houses from the sky or different areas of the earth and things such as, and it even got to the point that someone asked them to go take a picture of the moon, to which they took a few and sent them back, and through reverse Google image search, no one could find any records of these photos online. Furthermore, someone asked Mizium to come to their house. The person then went outside and started recording, and in the recording you can see a giant triangular ship pass by overhead and keep on going. The guy filming starts freaking out, comes back to 4chan, says that Mizium's real, and then at the end of this entire thing, Mizium said, well, gotta go, my family's here, and took off. So I guess Real Mizium is just saying that Mizium was not a hoax. So yeah. Prison planets can have two possible definitions. One of them is the idea that the Kessler effect, or Kessler syndrome, which is something that we've seen happen on Earth, in which debris from satellites and things such as are continuously hitting and bouncing off of each other and essentially creating a cloud around the world till eventually we probably won't be able to get spaceships out because this clutter will be too much. This theory goes further to the point that the idea we haven't interacted with extraterrestrials yet is because they have done the same thing in their own time and made it impossible to escape their planet. The other theory is that humans are not the natural members of planet Earth, and some thousand years ago, humans were brought to Earth as a sort of prison planet by extraterrestrials. The evidence for this is things such as humans are not meant to walk upright, and that we constantly get lower back pains from the way our bodies are positioned, and that we are supposed to be living in a different kind of atmosphere. This also would explain why such old world cults and religions had ideas of flying saucers and look to the stars and things such as, essentially as a means that we were put here as punishment and we spent the last 1,000 years trying to get back out. Malta Catacombs is in reference to a series of catacombs that were discovered in the 1960s around Malta, Italy. The stories of this one get weird. The way it was discovered is that home contractors were digging around the area and accidentally broke through the rock into this complete underground labyrinth that had never been discovered. After researchers went in, they discovered it was much, much bigger than just one room and instead was a necropolis, or city of the dead, in which 7,000 bodies were buried in these underground catacombs.
Dang.
What's especially weird is why they all had sort of a ritual done with their burial. It seems as incense was burned on each of them. Inside of there was Christians, Muslims, Jews, and other different competing religions all buried in this one area. What's even weirder is that on examining them, several of the skulls were elongated, and not to the point of skull binding that is found in several sort of African cultures in old world history, like these very, very long non-human looking skulls. It is estimated that the caves are as old as 4,000 BC. Research became scant after a group of researchers went to the cave, and upon getting to the end of one of the systems, one of the chief researchers said that she approached a giant drop-off, and then in shining her flashlight to the other side, she saw a sort of embankment that 25 people came out of, each of which were 20 feet tall and wearing robes. When they saw her with the flashlight, they all looked towards her and began reaching out their arms. Her and the rest of the research team got out of there, and a couple weeks later, 30 school students went to the area on a sort of field trip to which they got lost, and people that were looking for them heard screaming and shouting, and none of them were ever found. The crew then got out of there, boarded it up, and to this day it is a no-go zone. So what's in the caves? Why were those bodies never found? And what were those creatures walking around in there? Amphibians in Iraq was near impossible to find information on. I'm pretty sure this is in reference to the lizard men of Iraq. Around a place in Iraq called Ubaid, there was a sort of coliseum that was found and discovered to be an old burial chamber. Upon going inside, there were several bodies and statues of old people from Iraq, but what was very weird is several thousand of these little statues were of lizard men with these very elongated skulls and in different positions. What's even more interesting is why some may disclaim this and say, oh, it was an old world god. These were perfectly mixed in with the normal people statues, and they were all maintaining common poses, kind of saying that it was just a natural occurrence. To this day, no one knows the source of where these lizard men came from or what the knowledge about them was, and they just exist as if old world history was okay with them. Phantom kangaroos are a phenomenon that has been found in the United States, in which several people have reported seeing kangaroos in the woods or around their house. What's odd is there are
So the thing is, this could actually be possible because I know you can get kangaroos. I'm pretty sure over here. I think it's legal in certain states. You could just have a kangaroo for some reason. I think you can also like hunt them and things like that. So yeah, I could see there being kangaroos around here randomly.
several hundred occurrences of this, with it going from everywhere to someone saw them in the middle of the woods to someone saw one on their front porch, and this is as recently as 2018. It's not like some old previous century concept. Some of these descriptions have them as being much larger than normal kangaroos and even armored. These descriptions match that of Procoptodon, which is an old sort of kangaroo ancestor that remains been found in the United States in years previous, given the idea that maybe this is just an extinct animal that never actually went extinct and is existing in the forest of the United States. The Potomsky crater is in reference to a giant crater-like structure found in Siberia. What's interesting is this, while it may look like a crater on first viewing, is anything but. It is a giant rock structure that just perfectly matches the shape of it, and what's even weirder is that the area immediately around the crater is very much overgrown as compared to the woods around it. Now, while this may lead you to think radiation, there are no highly active radiation in the area. The nearby tribe, the Yakut, has said that it is a place that people do not travel or else they get sick and die, and have even named the area Fire Eagle's Nest. One of the only research groups to ever go and try to take a look at it, because remember it's in the middle of Siberia, in 2005 had their leader die of a heart attack upon approaching it, and there hasn't been much research since.
Yeah.
So yeah, make your own conclusions about that. Thomas Pynchon was an author that is still alive and is most known for his books he wrote in the 1960s. It would take way too long to explain all of the things that he talked about in his book, but essentially he was a fiction author that used like advanced science as a basis for his stories. More specifically, a concept he is famous for dealing with is that of Maxwell's demon, which is the idea that if you had a very small figure that could individually interact with particles and heat on a microscopic level, it could tip the balance of entropy and make physics work backwards. He used this as the basis for a lot of his books and is known as either having a higher understanding than the average person, or creating concepts that are so abstract they've led to several concepts in modern theoretical physics. Animism is just the broad idea of applying a soul or spirit to anthropomorphic objects. That's actually where the idea of anthropomorphism comes from. So essentially you can imprint the idea of a spirit or character onto a physical item enough to the point that it eventually becomes real. The Dighton Rock is a rock that is found off the coast of the Taunton River in New Jersey. What's interesting about this rock is that it looks perfectly normal from a distance, but as you get close to it, you realize there are these very deep inscriptions all over it that do not make sense in any recorded language, and the depictions also don't match up with anything. Theories about this rock have ranged from King Solomon in showing that the depictions of it are that of the Old Testament, or Norse mythology and that it is an entire story of Odin laid out on the rock. But both of those ask the question, then why would this rock show up in New Jersey unless Solomon or the Norse or something like that arrived at America and brought the stone with them from all that time before? Either way, it's still interesting that it got there with absolutely no recorded history of it being there. Bunkers in Mars is in reference to the fact that the Mars rover caught a few short glimpses in the middle of rock faces on Mars of what seemed to be these windows or cutout metal places. This is combined with the theory that water originally existed on Mars, and says that
Yeah.
the planet had a mass extinction event in which everyone had to go underground, and that from looking at the Mars rover's images of the planet of Mars, that we can see sort of these last remnants, or possibly still living remnants of the Mars population. Triassic mystery is a little too vague for my liking, because there are several Triassic mysteries when it comes to missing links and things such as. However, the one that I found the most reference is that of Craterochaerodon, which is essentially a giant omnivore that was discovered, and its teeth don't make sense for its skull, and it's supposed to be a sort of missing link. So yeah, that's it. Montanism comes from a man named Montanus, and was an idea he developed in the 2nd century AD, which essentially says that you can continue to expound on the Bible and get insight through revelations. This was specifically done with him, in which he saw that there would be a soon coming end of times, and started sort of the first cult in this ideology, or at least first known religious cult in this ideology, that God would come back soon, specifically at his church. Ideas of Montanism today are just that Christianity can be expounded upon if people receive direct information from God. The Sabic Tomatovic tape, which I believe still translates in Serbian to sandwich tomato, is in reference to a Serbian porn star who claimed that she was roped by a giant spider.
Why is this a conspiracy theory?
No, I'm not kidding on that. It goes more so to say that she was roped by the Jabba Fofi, or Jabba Fofi, which is a cryptid from South America, which is essentially a giant 4-foot wide spider. And while there is evidence to back up that existence, there is no evidence to back up this tape. However, she supposedly became popular in something called Jinky Jinky, which is a Japanese ring of insect-related films, and became a star with costumes and machines in that realm. And I don't want to live on this planet anymore. Marco Rodin was originally a physicist who came up with the concept of the forever electron, and that there's a path that an electron could follow in which it could convert energy without ever losing it. So essentially a forever supplying power source. Since then, he has got very much so into esotericism and went on this long discovery to try to figure out the name of God and the source of God. And through this series of calculations he did, he figured out that the holy number was 9 and that God's name was Abha, A-B-H-A. So, yeah. Operation Paperclip was something that happened after World
sounds
War II
familiar.
and is now pretty well known, in which 1,600 Nazi scientists were granted U.S. citizenship for their assistance in the American rocket program, and more specifically, the space race. The theory goes...
Yeah, didn't all types of countries get scientists from Nazis, like Russia, other countries just in general got them?
Goes on to say that the only reason we beat Russia to space is through the help of German scientists. Planck feedback is the idea that as something is heated, it becomes more radioactive. So negative Planck feedback would be the idea that deriving temperature or energy from a system creates more radiation, or in other words, adding heat to it would cancel out the radiation. And it's another one of those sort of like nonsensical concepts in theoretical chemistry, that you could remove radiation from a system or destroy it through amount of energy given in or taken out, only backwards. Manichaeism is this 3rd century concept of religion. It essentially applied ideas of Christianity, Gnosticism, and pagan gods all into one. It originated in Persia and is essentially the idea that Christianity can present itself through pagan gods or modern rituals and things such as, and that all of these ideas of supposedly non-religious elements can come together and make the godhead of sorts. So it's essentially combining Christianity with pagan deities. Valis is a novel written by Philip K. Dick, who was a famous science fiction author in the 1980s. Valis stands for Vast Acting Living Intelligence System. Essentially, it is the idea that God is a simulation, or rather we are living through a simulation created by God. However, a lot of his theories apply back to Gnosticism, which again was mentioned in the last theory and several of the theories beforehand. And again, it all relates to that idea of there being a god and lesser gods. So what you could derive from this is that the Valis system itself he wrote about is one of these lesser gods. ICBM decoys has two different definitions. The first being that countries that do not have ICBMs will simply have fake ones in order to deter other world powers from attacking. So
Makes sense.
essentially the whole gun in the paper bag thing. Also, for those who don't know, ICBM stands for Intercontinental Ballistic Missile.
Yeah.
The other idea of it is that whenever an ICBM is launched, there will be several fakes launched with the real one, just so that whatever system is trying to shoot it down has a lesser chance of actually stopping the missile. Pertoa, from everything I can find, is another reference to 4chan. For those that don't know, whenever someone posts on 4chan, their flag of origin and country is shown whenever they do so. For a small window a few years ago, there were a few flags that popped up that had the country listed as Portoa, and had a unique flag that had never been seen before. Immediately afterwards, all those posts disappeared, and 4chan simply acted like it was a glitch that never happened, leaving people to believe that Portoa or Portoya is a country that exists in a parallel universe. Tier 5.
All right. Woo, that was so much. It's a crazy tier. I swear, all these tiers, I'm just like, I feel like in that last one I had like 4 things that I knew about. But yeah, thank you guys for watching. You know, we'll be back for another one of these in probably a day or so. And yeah, I'll catch you guys later.